What we love in wood as architects, first thing is the material. It's living, it's beautiful, it ages with you. So it has this quality that you are having a long lifetime discussion with it. You can also repair it, mend it very easily. Anybody can build in wood, even if we are not all able to build like Japanese carpenters. And the great secret of wood and of all plants is this, and this is why they are so important today. This is really simple chemistry. Basically, plants take CO2 from the atmosphere, water from the ground, they take sun and they transform it into sugar and oxygen. So this is why plants grow on this energy. It's like they're making their own Coca-Cola, and you are super happy when you're in the forest because you are overwhelmed with oxygen. So we all have this very special relationship, I think, with trees around us. These are two very distant examples of this sort of very interesting relationship. One is in Africa. It was a road, and well, the workers making the road, they had to cut through the forest, and they sort of felt sick at this moment, and the machines weren't working. So they said, okay, there's probably a spirit in the tree that doesn't want to get cut, so let's just make the road around it. Simple. Funnily, same thing happened in Japan. We are here at the end of one of the highest valued property possible in the world. And they had a small tree, camphor tree, and they cut it at the start of the construction, and the tree started sprouting right away. Said, oh, probably a spirit there. So they made a ceremony to sort of apologize to the spirit, and then they put the building a few meters back to respect the tree. So interesting to see how different cultures like this have this sort of relationship. We love planting trees. We tried in a competition for the surroundings the Eiffel Tower, saying, okay, let's transform all this area into a huge forest with wolves, witches, and things like that, and we lost. Now this is the serious part about sustainability, because it all seems very intuitive and easy, but we are, I mean, a lot of things are building up on an international, European, national level, even local level. Basically, I've tried to summarize 50 years of the sustainability approach on buildings in France and Europe, of course. On the bottom is all that is law, all the things that we have to do, whatever happens. On the top is all the things that are more holistic, that try to bring together different approaches to building. Because basically the law, you just have to apply the law, otherwise you're outlaw. The other approaches, which are referential labels and things like that, they have this interesting thing that they are always evolving. They're always trying to catch up with new ideas. They have a faster cycle, but still they are always a bit complicated. What you see in red is all these laws and labels that have concerns regarding restoration of buildings. For a long time, you can see almost till like 20 years ago, it's really the moment when we start realizing that there is a huge issue about sustainability in renovation of existing buildings. I'm not going to detail everything in it, of course, lucky you. But still, it's very interesting to see all this map of things that are evolving, and to have this into conscious, because sometimes as architects, you know, people just say, okay, you're going to apply this new law, and you say, what the hell, we already have this one, we already have this, and we end up, you know, piling like 5 or 6 different systems together. Basically, it's super easy to understand, because everything goes back to the Brundtland report in 1987, which defined sustainability as being the intertwine between social, environment, and economy. And everything that you see, you can always break it down to these 3 aspects. So it's also an easy way to sort of relate the different levels. The thing is that you see the first column, NF Habitat HQE, is a holistic approach that is totally voluntary from owners and builders and things like that. Why did we do it? Why do they do it? Because the law, as you can see, which is on the right column, is less asks for less? Well, they do it because it's also a guarantee for future owners, regarding who make maybe a mortgage to the bank. If you respect this, you probably are going to have a much better housing than if you don't respect it. So this is sort of encouraging by finance in a way to do it. And very easily it's broken into these three aspects of then since 2020, we have this new regulation in France on a construction code, building code that applies for the moment mainly to new buildings. But if you have an existing building and you just build like 10 more square meters, puff, you have to apply it. And the interesting thing in it is that usually all these rules talked about only about energy and summer comfort. And now there is this carbon aspect that is really, really important. And this is really a worldwide move. And I think Europe is pretty much forward in that. Even though we all have national referentials, national ways of calculating the carbon footprint of materials and buildings, there is a sort of convergence of it. Just to give you an idea, in France we started listing the carbon footprint of materials like 20 years ago, and now I think 1/3 of the database worldwide comes from the this French database. It's not going to be so simple as you're going to see. As an office, this is how we work, because trying to manage through all these things, we have made our own guide, which is to combine these three aspects. You also find them, social, environment, economic, 6 sort of topics for project that we have regarding social design, life support, the construction impact and life cycle impact, and how do they apply at different levels of a project, from super large climate conditions to the materiality and the sensitivity feeling that you can have of the buildings. Then there are people who are really fed up with all this, which is so complicated, and to try to have super simple rules. And there is this great initiative launched by French, Belgian, Spanish, I think, Italian architects that is called frugal architecture. And they just have these 4 or 5 set of rules that is each time being in opposition to the business as usual way. And it's a very interesting way of tackling things. It's also, as you can see, a network of people who exchange on practices, on recipes, could I say. And it's also possible to launch a chapter here, or national, or citywide, or whatever. Now I'm going to show a few projects, sort of timeline. So one of the first projects is the first project we made in wood. And as you can see, at the time, there wasn't much much regulation and much holistic approaches to do. So basically, it was a super small house. And so you say, wow, a wood house, that's super ecologic, super sustainable. And so we made last year this tentative to see how does it comply to the actual French energy and carbon footprint regulation. It's a nightmare. It doesn't work at all. As you can see, there's as it was in 2002, there's only one aspect that is good. The rest on energy, on things, and you can try to upgrade it as you want. It's not going to meet all the requirements that are going to be stricter until 2030. So even what was considered as an avant-garde construction in the year 2000 is already outdated. So this gives you also an idea of the work, the challenges that we all have to do. But doing it, we also met this incredible thing, which is wood building, carpenters, and off-site production. That's really maybe, I think, the thing that joins what I'm going to say with this real issue about renovation. It's really that all this is working off-site. It's made in factories. When I say factories, it can be really simple, or it can be something like this, which is a factory in Japan of this building system I showed on the first slide. And they are getting out maybe 5,000 houses a year in this factory with maybe 5 to 10 people working in it. So it's all automatized. It's all a super digital system. At the same time, what I like in this picture is that you still have people who have these manual skills, and they sort of build their own boxes to store things. They sort of arrange the thing. They have the know-how. And this is something that is really interesting, I think, with wood in this perspective of new and renovation, is that it requires a lot of skilled people, a lot of education. It is also a very interesting perspective for young people today. A second project that I'm going to talk about is a 100% wood structure in Paris, but it's also a project with what has been, let's say, for us, the main retrofitting activity we had, which is working in the heritage areas of Paris, with the difficulty that since it's heritage, you have heritage architects who are always having issues, which was a good thing for us on this project because basically we were completely outlaw on the wood aspect. There was no code building on it, so we were really improvising, and there was no proof that what we're saying was real. But everybody was so focused on the idea of bringing external insulation on an old Parisian building, and you can see the picture of the state it was before we intervened. It was really not a heritage and interesting building, but since it was in this perimeter of the heritage architects, they had a voice on it, and they were really focused on it because they were so frightened that all the Parisian stone buildings were going to be covered, you know, by polystyrene with plaster on it. So this was really also this really moving on this sort of off-site production, because also one of the interests of it was that since it's off-site, you have a building that takes less longer, and this applies also in renovation, and you have less troubles for all the people living in or around. In fact, the construction work was so silent that the neighbors complained. They complained because there was only 1 day a week when there was noise when they were delivering the panels. And so this was the 1 hour when the street was blocked, but they couldn't understand it. If they had a traditional construction work, they would have had a 7 days a week issue with work, with noise and dust and things like that. Same exercise. So this one is 10 years old. So how does it go? Not too bad. Not too bad. Because there are a lot of things that could be done better. One of them is very clearly air tightness of the buildings. At the time, we didn't have, products existed, but we were completely out of cost. I mean, passive house, which was really the state of the art, was completely out of cost in France in terms of material disponibility. So we could really better it. And then there are also things that you realize. If you want to lower the carbon footprint of building, don't build an underground parking. That's first evidence. This is where the mass of carbon goes, because you have huge foundations, you have higher walls, and basically it's completely useless unless in maybe 20 years we want to grow mushrooms in it. And then there is the issue of energy. Here we are still on a system of gas energy, but collective energy, but still limited to these buildings. 20 meters from that was the arrival of an urban energy system provided by burning waste. But at the time, having these 20 meters was like 1 million euros more. What's interesting is that now Paris law has given the obligation for the people who run this facility to bring their energy, whatever the cost, everywhere. So basically this means that if we were doing it the same way now, we would be okay until 2027 under the actual French regulation. Not too bad. Now we move a bit more and arrive to what was a pretty big challenge. This is, as you can see, 12 levels above, 13 levels above ground, and it's entirely a wood structure. There is no concrete in the structure, and it's also a bit of a challenge because it's in Strasbourg and it's a seismic area, which means that we were doing same thing, there was no references. Except that what's interesting here is why was it possible? It was possible also because the municipality of Strasbourg was very strongly involved. They had made a zone of 500 housing units that they called the biosourced area. And they wanted that by having 500 units, there would be the sort of opportunity for local builders to change the ways of building. There would be a market opening for biosourced materials ranging from wood to insulation. And so they made this really strong decision, and then they were there all the time. So it took quite a long time to build. I mean, from the competition to deliver it was like something like 6 years, because in the meantime, all these 500 units were testing the limits of technical building code in France. And so there were a lot of meetings, a lot of trials, but that was only possible because there was this public authority running the show. So here you can see it's the construction. It's made in CLT. Basically, it's a super CLT for architects. It's like building a model when we were in school, cutting cardboard. So it's pretty simple, except that it's real life. Same thing, it's completely off-site, which means that to build these 150 units, there were 4 people during the structural part. There was 1 on the crane, 1 on the ground, 2 or 3 on the building that were just having the panels lifted, put on site, screwed, and that's it. Then what's interesting also is that in all these industrialized systems, you always, when you want to have the approval by engineers and controllers and things like that, they are always asking strong questions. One of the questions we have faced here is that there are earthquakes, and you know, these systems that are industrialized, they have metal connectors. Nobody, except maybe a supercomputer at Google or whatever, is able to have a model of how these connectors react in case of an earthquake. So we were stuck, and this is where the carpenters, with their sort of archaic or traditional knowledge, came and said, well, there's a really easy way to do it, and it's what you see on this picture. The detail is that you just put this pink piece of wood at the junction of the two. You screw on one side, you screw on the other one, and this is considered as a traditional way of assembling a floor and a wall in construction. No more issues. So it's always interesting to, at the same time, be in this digital process, super industrial process, but also have the feedback of how things were built and trying to incorporate it in the way that we do things. We made a mock-up. The building was supposed to be with wood facades. We made a mock-up and had it burned, and realized that there were going to be a lot of issues that had not been seen. So all this test and try real life thing is really something that is going to happen, I think, quite a lot and quite more faster, because it used to be things that, you know, it started in the university, then there were tests and things like that. You had a sort of 5 to 10 year span between the start of the reflection and the moment it gets really on the market. Now we need to test things in maybe 1 or 2 years. Now, when you look at the carbon inside here, so this is, it was thought 10 years ago, it was delivered a bit 6 years ago. And you see that we are already super good, except on the actual regulation, except on one thing, which is the carbon footprint of embodied components of the building. We are not at the final step, which is the 2031 step. So when you look at what's how this applies, so you see that structure, well, we're not going to go really lower. And then you have 3 elements that really have a super strong carbon footprint. The thing is that these 3 elements, they are mainly industrial components, which means that we're not going to be really able to lower the carbon footprint of our buildings if we don't have the industrials working on it. And when I say industrials, that's really important, because industrial means investment. When you change the line making a car, you know that it's going to cost billions. When you change the way that you make an electric plug, it's also going to cost a lot of money, because there's really a design, industrial test, market things to do behind it. So really the biggest challenge we have in the next 5 years is really bringing all the industrials who are making a sort of progress, but that maybe don't realize the impact that every single simple element that you have in a building has on its carbon footprint. And of course, when I say carbon footprint, it's a sort of nice way of saying things, because when you say carbon footprint, it means you're pouring more carbon into the atmosphere and you are pursuing the climate change disaster. I told about this sort of database of industrial materials. This is what it looks like. It's not very sexy, but you have a whole list of it. And what's interesting is that you have 3 levels. And this is when it becomes a bit funny, because also this is not science. It's not Nobel Prize science. It's really things that are evolving that you have to take with, you know, a pinch of salt and be able to understand what's behind the numbers. Because, for instance, with this is, you know, the floor. In Strasbourg, we had, because it's an area where you have super hot summers and super cold winters, we had devised this idea of having, you know, concrete slabs with water flowing inside, which is a great way when it's hot or cold water to bring winter and summer comfort. Basically, it works. We didn't have any bad returns on it since 5 or 6 years now. But still, that's concrete, and it's very special concrete because it's under special conditions. And this is the high rising thing. But that's also because at the time, we only had the figure, which is generic 2013, which is the number, the carbon footprint of this material that is decided by the government because there is no other figure. So they sort of decided, okay, it's this level. Then you see that 2019, all the industrials, they made their own calculations and they came with this number. The thing is that the guy who provided us the system, he made his own calculation on his system 2 years later, and then up, it rises a bit more. So it's really like, you know, you have to be cautious about it, but it's interesting to see also how things can evolve very fastly. One of the last projects, which is a pretty big one, which is the Olympic Village in Paris. So this is one half of the Olympic Village. We were co-coordinators of the part which is on the right. You see this big axis, which was on the right. It was a huge competition with private developers, contractors, and architects. We were a team of about 6 architects. And our part was mainly to sort of have everybody talk together between some of our friend architects who had crazy design ideas, a contractor who wanted to make everything into concrete, and the government requirement which was to make sustainable buildings. So it was really bringing everybody together and developing a system, a building system that would be able to fit all these requirements. And the big challenge was also making a district which is made in wood, but you don't know that it's made in wood. It looks normal because there is still in France. I mean, France, we are a country of stone builders. People think stone when they think house, and when they see wood, they think fire. So here is the system. It's very very simple because you just have posts and beams. You have a wood load-bearing facade. And then you still have this concrete floor. Same thing, it's for winter and summer comfort, which is really, really a big issue. So possibly it's less good in terms of carbon embodied footprint, but it's going to be pretty good in terms of comfort and carbon operational footprint. So really there's always this balance between a lot of requirements that you have to put in weight, and also, of course, the cost. So to do it, and at the scale of the village, there was really the issue, because basically this is something that was really easy to do in France when you go to, let's say, 4 or 5 levels. When you arrive above that, you are into unknown land, and you have to have these sort of certificates to be able to build. And the sheer volume of the Olympic Village, like there's something like 2,500 living units, was a huge opportunity to sort of improve what you can do with a wood structure that can be self-standing, but it's exactly the same thing as if we were going to make it on panels on an existing building. It would be the same regulation. So this is what's interesting, is that all the benefits that were made with this are going to be useful for what is the biggest challenge for us now, which is retrofitting existing buildings, because this has proven that it works, and the regulation now is working on both sides. This is just to give you an idea of the total nightmare it is to be innovative in France in construction. I'm not going to tell you how it works, but it gives you just an idea of all the different steps you have to go to be able to have an official stamp to use a building technique. And this is what it looks like at the end. So you see, basically, you don't really know that it's made in wood. and you don't really know that it's not an existing building that has been benefited by wood building. Just nearby, we made this, and this is interesting because speaking about renovation, usually a lot of things that we think about is renovation of the facades, because the main first big issue is the thermal efficiency of existing buildings, which are really poor in the way and are poor in the future. It's the technical aspect of ventilation, which is also generally pretty poor. But there's also a whole aspect, which is how do you transform things inside. And interestingly, there is a new law that passed in France that is for the moment only for public buildings, but it's going to be applied to private soon, which is that you have to incorporate 20-25% of existing recycled, upcycled, reused building materials in the interiors of new or renovated buildings. So this is the sort of thing we tested by making this big food court where we made all the furniture by ourselves. And when we started showing this to social housing people with offices who have this real issue of renovating all their housings, they say, wow, would you like to make all the new kitchens that we are going to have to redo? Because this would be a great way for us to comply with the law. So really, it's interesting to see how things can go from one to another. Now, on renovation, I have one experience which is a bit mixed, but is a bit interesting also on the process, because we didn't do it. It was a city that is in the north of France that had a social housing problem. They didn't know what to do with it, and they came with an idea. This is also to just show what is... Okay, we know that there is already a lack of ways of living in existing buildings, that sometimes when people are free, they sort of make it extensions by themselves. But we know that there is also, and this is also why it's super important to be able to, in a way, answer as industry. And when I say industry, it's both builders, architects, to be able to have tools both on existing and on new, because we know also that actually there are 5.5 billion square meters built every year, which in the world. But of course, it's not in Europe. It's happening more in the south. And this means that it was one Paris a week, one New York a month, one Tokyo a year that is built, which is absolutely huge. And this is in places where basically 1/3 to 50% of the population is already living in slums. And you can understand that because this is in France. It's in French Guiana. And a study has showed that building in slums in France, in French Guiana, is 42 euros per square meter, which is super low. How do you compete with that to make a more sustainable and a more comfortable living for this almost quarter of humanity that is actually in these conditions? So that's a challenge. But our challenge is really illustrated here. The two blue things above are new constructions. It's projected around the demographics of France, so it's to be really taken with caution. And the rest is existing. And what is in green is what has been renovated for high performance in France right now. So you can see that the real challenge, and you have the line where we are now, so you can see that the real challenge is going to be this renovation of existing buildings in a national perspective. And the thing is that we are not really on track to do it. We're not on track to do it because this is pretty much a counterexample. So this is the situation we had. You have this social housing units that are in the center of this small town in France. Oh shit, I didn't. Oh yeah, here it is. Which look like this. I mean, it's not neither good nor bad. Of course, I wouldn't put the parking on the south space. And the whole idea was that because the office who run it and the city didn't agree on what to do, they invited 4 teams of architects and landscapers combined to spend 3 days on site to come out with ideas. What can we do in the next 30 years with this place? So we were having a sort of office in an apartment that was free. We were sleeping in the apartment. We came a bit late, the beds were gone. And our team, well, we started just going around the city, looking about what's happening in all these places and noting things. We noted two things. One thing was that people use their cars mainly as a storage. It's a mobile storage. Shit, it's the same picture. The other thing was that except for this area, all the other parts of the city are private gardens, sometimes very small, very narrow, but they are gardens. This is something that is lacking here. So being there was also this great possibility you meet people. So we met this guy and we talked about this. It's funny, people seem to be using storage in their car. I said, yeah, that's because we can't use the storage we have in the basement. I said, oh yeah, why not? Said, well, that's pretty easy because when they built this, it used to be a swamp. I know it because my wife, she went ice skating in the winter in this area. So it was a swamp. And so when they built it, they put some trees that were draining the water. And when the trees grow big, because they were making shade and people complained, they cut the trees. So now the swamp is going in the building. So just by being there 3 days, there was a sort of issue that everybody thought was super dramatic, impossible to understand. And you realize it's just because we don't have the knowledge. So it's really important, I think, to spend time on the sites. Then when you look at existing buildings, they're not so badly done, except that, of course, they are a bit small for today's use. They're not adapted to today's families. And you also realize one thing is that there's a lot of acoustic problems between the apartments. The acoustic is not, everybody thinks it's because of the structure. When you sleep there one night in an empty apartment, you realize that it's mainly by all the gains, the things going through with all the water pipes and things like that. It's really this. So the whole idea was, well, let's put all these things that are inside, we put them on the outside. This is the blue thing. This is also going to be possible then to change, make it easier to change the interior configurations. Of course, bring some elevators because there's a lot of old people. And then bring a better insulation by recycling, and also by thinking about, okay, if you bring an extra layer outside of the building, is it just going to be a solid layer installation? Maybe it's also an opportunity to bring something else. You can bring, balconies because there were no balconies. You can bring outdoor, semi-outdoor, indoor spaces, winter gardens, and things like that. You can, of course, have energy coming from the roofs. Maybe it's interesting at some points to take away one apartment to sort of lighten a bit the structure and bring light inside. You can reuse the water to grow fish and things like that. And so this was the proposal we made. So, of course, taking all the cars out of it. Having these sort of private gardens at the bottom, 10 minutes, it's okay. Having these private gardens and transforming the what was parking into this big plaza, which is going to be the place for the kids to play, local market and things like that. And of course, the thing is that if you want to do something like that, not think about making a project, doing the usual way of designing a project and building it, step by step, but having a on-site office to have this interaction with the people, because to make it, there's also going to be people who live there. They're going to live there while we redo their apartment and things like that. So there's a sort of necessity of a presence. The necessity also to rise competencies in the workers who are going to be there. So there's a lot of good reasons to be on site and to have more participation at all levels. And this is something that as architects, I think we must do a bit more. And the whole point was also proving that it doesn't cost so much, that having for a 10-year span a whole team that was on site all the time and doing this participatory process, innovation and things like that, was going to cost a bit 2% of the budget, which is really absolutely nothing. So of course we didn't want to bake it in use concrete, and going back to a bit these issues of material, maybe you know this absolutely amazing drawing, which is the difference. In green, it's all the biomass. Everything that is living on Earth is this. People, as you can see, is the little dot on the top. And then this is all the mass of materials that we have transformed on Earth since the last 200 years, which is absolutely enormous. And 47% of that is concrete, which is the third emitting country of carbon right now. I mean, there's a lot of things being done to make concrete greener, but time is really catching up. And the more you go about it, the less it's going to happen, because all these systems that are going to maybe reduce the carbon footprint of concrete, they are getting lower and they are getting a bit out of reach, and they're not getting more than 15–20%. So still, it's going to be a super emitting industry at a world size, because of course in Europe we're going to be able to use low carbon concrete. Great, but I mean in the global south, it's not going to be affordable anytime soon. So then, of course, forests. Okay, building with wood, super good. The thing is also we have to be cautious about the use of wood in a way, because yes, there are 3,000 billion trees alive. Each of us is the owner or the friend of 400 trees, to give you an idea, in the world. But there is also stress on trees and forests due to climate change and human activity, which you can see on the map. Still, there have been studies proving that if you reallocate wisely land between agriculture, different types of less intensive agriculture, forestry, more integrated forestry operations, things like that, you could probably cover the needs of building materials with wood worldwide. But still, I think there is really a big discussion going on about this. And then the whole 5 minutes, perfect. The whole industry is also having issues. This is in Africa. In Gabon, it's interesting. Gabon has the same population as Lithuania. It's also a forest country, but they export, and they also export most of their production. They don't transform it on site. But in the forest, you can see the whole process is super wasteful. They are burning the whole program of social housing every year in the forest. They are burning one house a day in one cutting facility. And when you realize it, you realize that from one tree, there is only like 50% of the tree that ends up in real materials, because there is waste all along the line. So it's really interesting to think in terms like that. What can we do with everything that is wasted at each step? So we are in the process of working with these people, trying to find a way between people in the city and the forest to sort these new industries. You can also think about using elements of wood that are considered waste, like all these embranchments, but these are, of course, the places where the wood is the most strong. So you can use it as junctions. And the MIT has started this study where they use them and they sort of have this parametric design. So this could be completely off-site, this could be completely industrialized, and still this could be completely personal, because each of these is one living being. And at the European level, there has been this study on the radical shift toward bio-based construction. Of course, timber is the number one. Number two to be used is straw, which is also a super available material, more for insulation. And then you have two materials that are a bit trendy right now, which are hemp and cork. But you realize that they are not able to bring us the volume that we need for the transformation that is ahead of us. Hemp, because basically it's going to be used to make clothes, and cork, because it's a really limited resource. So these are a few examples of things that are happening around these materials. One is with straw. It's in Paris, a social housing unit, and they have this straw on belts way of building that has been invented, which is very low tech, because as you can see, it's just having sort of wood planks every level, and you just put the straw on it, and then you have belts to tighten it, and you just put a lime plaster finish on it. And it makes for a super good insulation on an existing structure, in the condition that the structure is able to take the weight of the straw, because to have a good insulation in straw, you need quite a volume, which is quite a weight. And these are two other examples that are really right now. One is a social housing, which is more going into a high-tech system, which is off-site, totally prefabricated panels, but with a super high carbon footprint insulation inside, because they need to have something that is very, very light, because the structure is not able to cope with many added weight. And the whole idea is that you just have to bring these panels on, and you see there's just one, you have just these little metal elements to fix it, and that's it. And they are really in the process of testing this on, I think there's 100 or 200 units. And the other option is to have more things that are more also prefabricated, and this one is made with hempcrete, which can also be made to be applied on existing facades, and then you just have a lime plaster finish. So it's a different type process, but the two are also off-site systems that need small factories. And I came across this. Americans, of course, are also thinking about it. Yeah, 1 minute. And this is the system that is being developed, which is an all-in-one system. Basically, it looks like a bit of a big promise that's not going to work, because when you realize that you are going to make all these plumbing fixings everywhere, it's not going to be super efficient. And one last thing that could be used is earth. Super abundant. We have a lot everywhere. And this is an example of off-site earth use, because you have these blocks of rammed use that are made in a factory, and they're just piled one upon another in front of a facade. Here it's not an existing facade, but it could probably be used in front of an existing facade to bring insulation that could bring humidity control and good winter and summer comfort. And just to finish, two things, but maybe if you have the slides, you could go there, and if you know French also. There is a webinars on low carbon renovation that is made by an institute, and they have there is one on next week. The two first ones are on replay, so it's really possible to I didn't take the time, I'm sorry, to look at them, but everybody says they're super interesting, so please go. They are really having experience feedbacks for 3 or 10 projects that have been trying all these new techniques. And another thing that is also existing is this, which was made in Denmark, the carbon assessment on renovation, which is a bit on the topic we talked. Thank you.